everybody, Chris Aversano here. And before we get to today's podcast, just a word from our sponsor, Danelec, now part of GTT Marine. Voyage optimization has been a buzzword in maritime for years. So why are most operators still managing routing, speed, fuel, and emissions exposure as if they were separate problems? The Great Integration, a new report from Danelec and Thaddeus, argues that the next leap in Voyage performance won't come from another piece of software. It comes from how existing systems are connected, governed, and used, especially useful if you're running a mixed fleet under tightening regulations. Download your copy today at gttmarine.fr. And if you're interested in advertising on the podcast, please reach out to my good friends at Digital Ship. And now, on to today's guest.
Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading that charge. Today, I'm joined by Christian Treu from Danelec. Danelec is a GTT Group company helping ship owners and operators collect, connect, and use vessel data more effectively. Christian brings a strong commercial and leadership background across a variety of companies and types with a broad-based experience. That makes this a great conversation, not just about maritime technology, but more importantly about how digital solutions move from strategy decks into daily operational use. Christian, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Excited to get into this. Christian, your background is really, really interesting. And talk a little bit about this, about how you got to this point, a little bit of an overview of your career and how you found your way into maritime tech.
Yeah, maritime tech was actually by coincidence. I was sailing in my youth, not on conventional vessels, but on gray warships, and spending some time at the Naval Academy in Denmark. And then I actually tried to get away from the industry, so I joined IBM for a number of years. And one day I got a call from a guy I knew at Maersk and asking me whether I wanted to join Maersk. And as a Dane, you need to do a stint at Maersk, right? So I took the job. It was with subsidiary Maersk, the shipbroking division, where I worked there almost a decade, actually, doing various things. Amongst other, we launched a fund called Navigar Capital Partners, etc. We were doing advisory and, of course, S&P. One thing we also did, and what is really fantastic about shipbroking, is that you have an opportunistic way of approaching business. We bought a small AI and machine learning company in London, and due to my background from IBM, I was asked to oversee that investment. And that sort of segued into me going into the maritime tech. Later on, I joined Maersk Tankers spin-out ZeroNorth, where I worked there. And for the last 3 years, I've been working at Danelec, now GTT Marine. So that's really by coincidence, I would say.
So that's interesting. Yeah, it's one of the two companies in Denmark that everybody seems to check the box with, right? Maersk or Lego. Not to say everybody does it, but it seems like a lot of people, back in the shipping days, back in my shipping days, it seems like a lot of people, when you came ashore, you worked for a company like I did, like Mobil or Exxon, or you worked for Stoll. So many people of kind of my generation checked the box at one point for Stolt, either as an operator, demurrage, on the brokerage side, as they call it, commercial. It's a really interesting background, certainly bringing the IBM side and then the shipbroking side, like you said, being creative. But those are some different types of companies, right? That some are smaller, entrepreneurial. Broking is kind of somewhere in the middle. You have to be an entrepreneur, but you have to work within a box. Talk a little bit about how that's formulated the way you look at things now at Danelec, and really you look at the industry as a whole when you start to think about growth, execution of what you're looking to do, or what you're looking to build, or what the market wants.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a huge difference when working at IBM and then working in a shipbroking firm and then also working in private equity-backed companies. I would say both Danelec as well as ZeroNorth were actually venture-backed companies, and there you get taught you work in sprints all the time. It's about speed. It's about investor narrative. I would say listed companies are a little bit different. but you get taught discipline and accountability around that, which I think is important. If I were to say one thing that is common for all of them, and that is that execution beats strategy around that, but the strategy is important. So you make sure that everybody is sort of pulling in the same direction. That can be more challenging in a broker environment, but definitely that is important.
You talk about strategy and execution, and one thing that we talk a lot about here is things like change management, and you're dealing with, tongue in cheek, the last dinosaur, people who kind of set their ways, and not for setting their ways just for the sake of that, but rather because they feel it works. Safety issues, efficiency issues, all kind of get set in their ways. When you talk to folks, whether you're here now or when you were at your other companies, to get them to change, always kind of difficult. Talk a little bit about how you walk through that process. I think that change management is a thread throughout all of this.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what you are selling and who you're talking with. And now I sit in one silo where we do performance and voyage optimization and talking with the performance team and talking with the technical team, which was something new when I joined ZeroNorth, because before that it was the commercial side you were talking with, different dynamics, etc. So I would say the common denominator in this is figuring out who am I dealing with, what are sort of the pain points that you want to address. And if you're selling something that is to the commercial team, you need to be razor sharp on the return on investment. You need to be razor sharp on you have limited time to convince them. I would say over the last couple of years, another thing is that the conversations we're having are becoming, you could say, more sophisticated around this. And I don't know whether it's because the entire value chain, we're getting sort of better educated, or it's because what I come with these days are more sexy than what it used to be. I don't know, but I think it's that's something new, at least.
You talk about pain points, and sometimes pain points is meeting the client where they are. Do you think it's becoming more sophisticated because the clients are becoming more sophisticated and that's where they are? In other words, as you have turnover and people who deal, let's say, more on the day-to-day tactical operational stuff, they may move up into more strategy, and then you're replacing them with folks who are more native to digital solutions. I'm Gen X, so I kind of straddle that. I wasn't native to digital, but I had to be adaptive. Whereas, folks who are younger, they become more and more, native and part of their day-to-day. Do you think that that's part of the reason why you're seeing more sophisticated users or people who require more sophisticated solutions?
I think it's part of the reason, but I also think whether you're Gen X or whatever you are, then we're seeing that the conversations we're having, and now I'm talking only data, etc., are becoming more in depth. We talk data architecture, we talk about where does the data come from and uptime, etc., and those things that we didn't really talk about before to the same level. Just one example is, now I've been trying to convince people to buy AI and machine learning models for the last 8 years. The questions you get back these days on the model, how is it working, what methodology are you using, context, etc., training sets on the model, etc., are far more sophisticated and refined than it was just 2-3 years ago. So I think both perhaps the younger generation, but I also feel that people like us, and I'm putting us in the same boat here, Chris, I think we're also becoming better at this despite not being 100% digital native.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that, certainly as we use more AI, or as AI is being put more in our day-to-day life, people have more sophisticated questions. I know one of the things that, with my work at with Mac that we deal with is okay, we use AI, we're using AI, but we always try to do it where we know what it's looking at. And then you can identify, and then, over time going out and explaining that to customers is super important, because then they know that the quality of their data is good. But the fact that, like you said, that clients are going to be asking that question, how do you know this is the right evaluation from from a model that you guys build or whatever is being built. That's like you said, that's a level of sophistication. I think even a year ago, people aren't asking that question.
No, absolutely not. And I think a year ago, you still had people saying, I don't really trust this AI. I don't really trust this machine learning. You can come with your models, etc., but I don't believe in it. And I think with what we have seen with, especially in the last 6 months around the whole AI agenda, and we can talk about whether it's hyped or not, we can just see that everybody's becoming more efficient, and we need to make sure that we are ready for this, both from sort of all parts of the value chain, but especially also in each of our silos, because it will change jobs for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to that in a second, but I want to touch more upon a little bit of what you're doing today. Dan, like you mentioned, it's a GTT company, so it falls underneath a big umbrella. I remember it wasn't too long ago that you guys, if I remember correctly, purchased Nautilus, so you were able to bring their technology in. Talk a little bit about the state of play of where you are, what you're doing today, and how that's evolved over the 3 years that you've been there.
Yeah, Danelec, which is now GTT Marine as of last week, we're generally in an exciting transition, I would say. Danelec started out as a hardware company doing Voyage data recorders and sensors on board vessels. That's sort of our DNA of where we come from. Then in the last 10 years, and this was started before I joined, we're doing data capturing and becoming a data transportation company to some extent. In the last 3 years, we have managed to sort of put an extra layer on that. And you're right, Nautilus acquisition gave a lot to that, and coming together with now our new family where we have vessel performance solutions, part of what we do. We have Ascens Morocco is bringing us that next layer around that, and clearly with GTT as parent company, then our knowledge into LNG and energy transition is really helping us a lot, where I see some of the, you could say, pure play maritime software players, they don't have same bandwidth, if I can say that, around that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's super exciting.
It is very exciting time. And, certainly kind of this intersection of hardware and software, I think is kind of interesting. And we're seeing this play out in other places. I'm curious, just from my point of view, you see a lot of these wind sail companies, very hardware driven. They have a data part to it. I'd love to see if that evolution happens as well, right? Where you get somebody who is whether a company like yours, or weather routing, or your former employer, ZeroNorth, says, okay, we're going to buy an interest in that because that makes sense. We have this software platform with this hardware platform. Because when I look at it, and going back again to your pain points, when you go into a ship owner or a shipbuilder, you can say, well, I can offer these savings and these efficiencies, but then you need to buy something else for fuel. And I see a time where there's going to be a company who could walk in and say, I can give you efficiencies in 10 different ways. Hull coating, wind sails, what you're doing now. GTT, I know, is more known for their obviously, like you said, their LNG and their what they do, but that has a level of efficiencies, especially now with LNG tanks for fuel. So there's a whole gamut of things.
I think that's interesting. Actually, GTT has a minority stake in Bound for Blue.
Okay. Geez.
So
yeah,
actually,
see, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, but that makes sense, because now with the software side, and now and you could be a one-stop shopping. I didn't even know that.
But I think you're absolutely right, and I do think that many platforms have either a hardware layer or software layer, but few of the companies out there actually have both at a meaningful scale. I mean, because there are some that has both, and I think that's important. It's not like IBM where you have a ton of products you can just take off the shelf, but I think having some sort of turnkey solution helps you just to get in the door and say, listen up, we can once we know where the sensors are and we know how to collect it, that also gives us the ability to have clean data, have it timestamped, etc. And we all know that the models are worth nothing unless the data is good. So I think in that sense, it's really it's an interesting time for the company as such.
Yeah, I had on years ago Scott Bergeron from Ollendorf, and he said, if somebody comes in and says, I can give you 15, it was some like 20% efficiency, you throw him out the door, right? Because he knows, like, this was a while ago before some of this. And that's what spurred my thinking about, well, yeah, one solution's not going to do that. You'll get 4% from this, or maybe 6 or 8% from wind. I think I've seen some numbers maybe higher or lower. I'm not trying to disparage that. I've had Bound for Blue on before. And maybe Hull does a little bit. But if you walk in and you could say, look, if we do this, this, and this, I feel pretty confident it can be a 14% improvement. And why don't you test it out with the sister ship, right? And you see that like Cargill and these other companies who have big fleets can do that.
Yeah, I agree. But I do think also that our industry in general, and here I'm only talking about sort of the maritime tech vendors, we have also been very good to promise the moon around the 20% that we could gain. But in essence, you're absolutely right. It's not one single solution that will bring you to that point. It is looking at it throughout the value chain and seeing what is it actually you can do on various things. And again, back to where you're trading, what is your trading pattern, how do you operate your vessels? There are so many variables that you need to take into the consideration around this.
I've always been kind of taking that view. You're going to need multiple ways of gaining efficiency, unless you're talking about putting on, a nuclear power plant on the ship, right? And then in that case, technically that's zero emissions, but that has a lot of hair on it altogether, which a completely different podcast, or maybe even a different podcast name or something. But that's something that I kind of wonder over time how that's going to evolve. But one of the things that we kind of touched upon was data, right? And talk about, collecting it and then making sure it's clean. There's always seems to be a bottleneck at some point. I had a guest on a couple of years ago saying that something to the effect of there's only about 10% of all data is collected from the ships, or rather 90% of whatever is collected or produced stays on the ship, and only 10% is sent out or been able to read. What do you think about that, and how do you see that improving?
I can't remember who said it, but I think I remember the podcast, and I do agree to that. I think it has become a little bit better around that, but I think collecting data we have done that for years. It's how we apply it and how we use it, and you have ship owners using sensor data from one provider, then you have a noon report from somebody else. You have fuel consumption from a third, and reconciling those into one single overview can be complex. But I do think we're getting to a point where it's becoming easier. Some of it is helped by, as we talked about, the sophistication layer, or something people actually know how to do something about it right now. We still have some trust issues, I would say, around the data that comes in. But I think trusting data is probably one of the biggest hurdles we have, and the reason why it's not being utilized more. And you go back to the noon reports. But we are seeing that it's evolving a lot, also to more than the 10% that you talked about a few years back.
The other question that now you have data, we talked about AI. One of the things that came up recently in an article, kind of this AI for AI's sake. And I feel that that's something like, we have data. So you collected data. Why do we need this? Why do we need this level? I'd love to get your opinion on, this whole idea. Does everything have to be AI? And pitfalls of AI for AI's sake, right? Like, we're going to put an AI model on it. Talk a little bit about what you're thinking, and a little bit about Danelec's approach as well, because I think it's going to be a really interesting moment in our industry and all industries. Is okay, I slap an AI label on something. What does that mean? Are we doing it just for the sake of increasing sales or getting in the door with somebody? What's your kind of take from the ground view of talking to clients and looking at their desire for that, as well as what actually it means?
That's a very good question. Let me see if I can answer it shortly. And then also a disclaimer, I'm doing this every day, right? So I'm spending a lot of time in the details around the AI. There was a number of years where when I came out and spoke with clients, I didn't mention AI. We were using machine learning models in the back, but not really talking about the value gain for the customers, because that was the important thing. And also another thing was that back in 2020, 21, 22, a lot of people was coming with AI solution and it didn't really work. So the industry was a bit tired of hearing about AI at the time. These days, you can talk about AI and how we apply that, etc. So that has changed a little bit. But I think my take is you don't have to use AI unless it makes sense. A physics model can be just as fine, and that's perhaps the starting point for any sort of work you need to do. And when we talk about performance models, having a naval architecture principles going before sort of just putting a large data set and then getting your AI agent to work on that is perhaps giving you better results than just trying to let the AI sort the data. So that's my take on that. But it's really, I think, more around religion than anything, Chris.
Interesting. The one thing I'd love to build on, because you brought this up now, kind of earlier, a little more directly and a little less directly just now, is ROI. So when you go and you talk to, especially the commercial side, looking at ROI, you go in, maybe they're receptive to AI, or you see that, and not just you, but in general, how do you start to show that ROI? Is that always a challenge? Because sometimes in your mind, it's very clear, you implement A, you get % ROI above what you spend. Talk a little bit about that process, about showing ROI and then allowing for measuring ROI and really kind of allowing the clients at the end of the day to save money where they can then deploy it elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a question we keep coming back to. How do you actually convince people to buy this? It's very different if you try to convince people to buy into sensors first, using high frequency data instead of having noon reports. Then it's really about saving time for the crew to fill out the reports, having the integration from logbooks, etc., frees up time for the crew, which makes sense. It can be difficult to quantify that in dollar terms, but that's really the story that we're talking about here. When we talk about voyage optimization, it will be our recommendation based on what did the vessel actually sail. Did it take the recommendations? Was it good? And if not, what was the financial impact if we look at the fuel consumption around that? So those are some of the things that we can say something about. Then of course the whole performance is something we can look into as well and have used as well. But again, it's when you come in and present numbers, then often it becomes conversation around the numbers and what the price is to get a dry dock in China versus what is the real value of the solution. So it can be tricky in that sense.
Yeah, I would imagine those conversations are tricky, but again, it depends on who you're talking to and how you talk to. Going back a little bit to the data for a second, one of the problems and one of the challenges with our industry in particular is you have a lot of different data sets that through equipment or machines or whatever that kind of are all in different places. That's a huge challenge. But the point is, all these different data sources feeding the machines, how are you looking at maybe trying to alleviate some of that burden? Is there anything to do around that? Because I think that's definitely one of the trickier things. And then having all these silos, especially around some of the OEMs, they silo their data. Will that ever be kind of where they're talking a little bit more freely to each other? What do you see on that? And what's a way forward? I mean, I don't know the answer to that question.
What is the way forward? Let's start there. I hope they will stop being so siloed, the engine manufacturers, etc. Because I do think, and one of the things that we are preaching a lot is partnerships. We are happy to partner with anyone. At the end of the day, none of the maritime vendors has really skin in the game, right? It's the operators, it's the ship owners that we are servicing that needs to help getting the rest of us to share data with one another. And we have a tendency of thinking that our own data is proprietary, and that's very unique, and we cannot share that with anyone. But in reality, yesterday's data is worth nothing. But if we use it for something, if we aggregate it or something like that, then it can be worth something. Here, I'm not talking about off-market deals for the ship broker. I'm not talking about those things. I'm just talking about the performance part of things. So that part is something where we need to be better as an industry. Will we ever get there? You asked. I hope so. I think we should be better at that. So let's see. We have partnerships with NAVTA and StormGeo, and at the same time we're also competing with these guys on other fronts. So let's see. There's an open invitation for everybody to give us a call, and we'll figure out for the benefit of the customers.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the hurdles that has been in place for quite some time. Certainly, I call this maybe the second maritime digital revolution. We had the first one back in the early 2000s, and you had a few platforms that said they were going to change everything, and that went nowhere. And now I think that maybe this is the second, or that was the second digital revolution, and now the third maritime digital revolution is going to be, how do we, do things with AI, and can they build models that will help maybe bridge the gap of some of these things, or maybe whether it's bridge the gap through some kind of modeling, or actually have the data and handle it in a way that protects everybody at the end of the day. Because that is one of the big things that AI looks at, that people who are concerned about giving away data, the whole concept of moating, M-O-A-T-I-N-G, moating, is very kind of important to a lot of data first companies, right? Because that's going to be something that they're going to have to, how do we keep our data proprietary while maybe allowing use and interaction with other data? Certainly that's something that we see pretty often.
Yeah, I agree. I very much agree to that.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. One of the things I'd love to ask you, you have a really interesting background, certainly with the Danish Navy, and then into IBM and Maersk. If you have to rewind, and as you concluded your service to, what would you tell somebody, let's say, who's in that phase of their career right now? What, why join the maritime space, and not just Maersk because you're in Denmark, but the maritime space in general?
I think one of the most fascinating thing about our industry is you can. There are so many things you can do in the value chain of our industry. And spending a week last week in Greece, seeing the many different components that go into our industry if you walk the floor. Whether you are a very commercial savvy guy, there is place for you in the maritime industry. If you're really a technical geek, there is a place for you as well. And I think it's one of the industries that that's been around since the beginning of time. And we talk about tech in your program here, but the industry was there long before tech. And even if tech went away tomorrow, the innovation that happens, and with people sailing where you need to be innovative and you need to think fast when you're on board, that will continue. And I think there are so many. I still, despite having spent some time in the industry, learn something new, perhaps not every day, but at least every week around our industry, if you stay curious. So I would say it's a fantastic industry. It's global, and still it's small enough. So when you fly around, you meet some of the same faces.
Yeah, I had that happen. Obviously, in Posidonia myself, I was walking the floor, and I was only at the main show for maybe 4 hours. I don't even think it was that long. Maybe it was 3 hours. And I saw people that I've known for a million years, and I saw somebody who went to the same university, was 2 years behind me, that I've known for, that would be over 30 years at this point. And it's remarkable just to walk the floor and do that. And the industry itself and is remarkable in that way. I was at an event, one of the booths had a little party, and we were invited to it, and I'm standing there just literally at the corner of the booth and watching people walk by, and every couple of minutes it would be somebody that I would know, sometimes from my time, with companies before, sometimes with a podcast, somebody told me, hey, are you the dinosaur guy? I go, well, yeah, I guess I am, but it's kind of funny to see that happen in real time. And I've had that happen a few times, which is fantastic and a tribute to all the listeners. But as we wrap up, I always love to ask the question. So if you listen to the podcast, which it sounds like you do, what are you reading these days? Obviously doing some traveling and getting out and talking to partners, maybe have an opportunity to read stuff. I need to read a little bit more. I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of scrolling, whether it's Instagram or X or some other doomsday sort of device. But what are you reading there, Christian?
Yeah, I like digital stuff. I'm also like old-fashioned books. So I normally read the 3 books at the time, and I like to rotate between genres. So I try to read some history books, some biographies, and also books on business and leadership. At the moment, I have a second career, which we could perhaps, that's a third podcast, but I'm also a football coach in my spare time for my youngest son. So right now I'm reading a book by a Norwegian coach on how you practice small kids in about soccer. The second book I'm reading is the School of Night by Karl Ove Knausgård, which is, I'm a big fan of Knausgård, and I think his ability to write about very ordinary stuff and still make it interesting is interesting. And the last one is actually a confession, because it's Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, and I know it's an old book, but I simply haven't read it. So I just started that because I found it in an airport. So that's a confession. But yeah,
well, you have to let me know about that one, and maybe drop it in at some point. Share with us on the link on the post here, because I've had that one in my hands physically and electronically. I have a Kindle. I'm like, should I read this? It's old. I don't know. He's read other stuff, so I'm curious to see how you find that. And one of the things that I do find a little bit with leadership books is sometimes some of the assumptions can be proven to be outdated. And I forgot the name of it, but somebody suggested a book. It's about leadership, and they talked about how great Jack Welch is. Now, I read another book called The Man That Broke Capitalism about Jack Welch, and about how basically for many years, how there was some accounting at the end of the quarter, they would bump up certain things to make their earnings look higher, and he had this run. And then as the company wound that back, they realized a lot of it was smoke and mirrors. Again, this is all water under the bridge. But that book was written before all these things came out. So the author assumed that Jack Welch was this great leader, and I'm sure he had wonderful leadership properties. But you look at it in the other context, I got like 10 pages in. I'm like, oh, I just wasted $25. I'm like, I'm never going to read this book again. This is just, they're making all these assumptions how good and how all these systems work when it actually didn't. So that's why I'm always a little hesitant about leadership books or books like that are written in the past, especially if they bring up contemporary leaders at the time.
Yeah, I agree. I met Jack Welch in an elevator in Copenhagen 13, 14 years ago, and actually up until this point he was one of the heroes of mine. I don't know. I think it's difficult. There is always context and timing around what kind of leadership ability is important, and it's also a matter of what context are you in. Are we talking about, are you at war? Then of course there are some other disciplines and something else that you need to adhere to, whereas if you are doing software development, then it might be a different leadership style. Yeah, I'll let you know, and you can borrow it if we meet up in Hamburg. If I'm done with it.
And likewise, I have the Man Who Broke Capitalism. I'll share that with you. I have it, a hard copy. It's sitting right behind me, and I always feel bad. One of my little pet projects, which I want to work on at some point, is I want to build one of those. And I don't know if you have it in Denmark. Maybe you see it here in the U.S. Sometimes people at the end of their driveways or like a point on their property, they'll build like a little library. And we have a road where we live. It's near a park, so a lot of people walk dogs. A lot of people walk dogs with their kids. So I want to leave out like a little like little lending library. I want to build it and stick it on like a corner of my property. and put in a bunch of books, because you get books and then, I give some to the library or give some to people. There's one or two that I like to hang on to, but for the most part, you share them. So I want to do that. So I'll definitely, if I remember, I'll bring that to Hamburg in September. And I'd love to hear how the Leaders Eat Last review from you as well.
We can have a book club. And Neil Gansman also has Sunday readings on LinkedIn, which I actually enjoy a lot. Which gives inspiration as well.
Neil does a great job. I tried to feature the books that people mention separately, like to do it that way, and then a one-man gang on this podcast. I thought it was a little too much. So, but no, it's great to hear that. Christian, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing not only what you're doing at Danelec, which is kind of interesting stuff, especially now partnered with GTT, a known brand, hardware, and bringing you guys along that have been established as well. Certainly not a startup. And of course, more importantly, your career, how you view the evolution of Maritime, as well as some of those pain points. Thank you for coming on, Christian. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It was a pleasure.